President, I rise today to speak about the unprecedented housing crisis that's plaguing our state. This housing crisis is not one that's crept up on us. We've had Labor governments in South Australia for around 18 of the last 22 years, watching South Australia's population grow and not accounted for the housing supply that's needed to go with that growth. Sadly, Mr. President, property analysts say that South Australian housing crisis is going to get worse before it gets better. For too long has the government pushed aside the reality that we need housing, and now South Australians are paying the cost. Today, I'm standing up for the hard-working South Australians whose voices aren't being heard, for those who can't get their foot in the door to own their own home, and for those hard-working South Australians who are competing against hundreds of others to rent an overpriced home. That's not an exaggeration, it is hundreds. Realestate.com.au revealed today that demand for rooms in share houses is far outstripping supply in some Adelaide suburbs amid the cost of living and rental crisis. There were 105 people searching for a room in Brighton where there were none to rent, while Glenelg had 314 with just 4 available, according to the data. Meanwhile, there were 133 people seeking a room in Marion with just 2 available and 143 in Henley Beach, where there were just 3 on offer. In bad news for South Australian renters, the residential vacancy rate in Adelaide during January 2024 was 0.5% compared to the national average of 1.1%. We have the second worst residential vacancy rate in the nation. This is putting upwards pressure on prices. With September 2023 rental prices for houses rising around 8% per annum, while apartments were rising around 11%. These soaring prices ultimately put lower income households into financial or housing distress. To highlight that point, Mr. President, in the last financial year, more than 6,600 South Australians became homeless. 70% of those were aged around 18 to 44, and well over half were parents with children. Then there are those in our community who are trying to break into the property market. For those who are trying to purchase their first home here in Adelaide, they're battling with record average asking price of more than $864,000, the highest in the state's history and almost more than double the asking price 10 years ago. But it gets worse. Analysis carried out by the Grattan Institute highlights that between 2001 and September 2022, the national cost of a home grew by more than 400%. Mr. President, examination of the 2021 census by the Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute highlighted that in 1981, about 61% of Australians aged between 25 and 34 owned a home. But by 2021, that had fallen to less than 45%, and there are fears that this will only get worse with the rapidly rising costs of owning your own home. Data analysed by Finder in late 2023 found that the minimum household income required to afford the average house is now more than $182,000. Yet when the ABS reviewed personal income tax data from the 2020-2021 financial year, it found that the median income in Australia was $54,890. Now let's compare the difficulties of buying a home now compared to years gone by. Recent research shows that stamp duty is now around 4.4 times higher for Adelaide home buyers than in the 1980s. Data sourced by the ABS highlights that baby boomers would be required to spend around 4 times their average annual salary to purchase a home, compared with Gen Z, who are now required to spend around 11 times their annual salary. What isn't helping right now is the cost of living crisis that's pushing South Australians to their breaking point. It's forcing them to take extreme measures to ensure that their rent and their mortgages are paid, all while keeping the lights on and keeping food on the table, a task that sadly for many South Australians, Mr. President, is not an easy task at the moment.